And so now traveling back eastward, I'm delighted to say I've made good time. It's only taken me 2 days. 2 days to return to this particular site, which I dare say has changed dramatically. This, as you all know, was a tobacco warehouse where our government, the new Commonwealth of Virginia, was removed in the spring of 1780. I was the last resident of what had been the Royal Governor's Palace in Williamsburg. I had attended to that when I was still a subject of the monarchy of Great Britain, while I was still a student at the old Royal College of William and Mary there in Williamsburg, invited by a gentleman I have referred to, the most able man I've never known to hold a seat of office, Governor Francis Fauquier. They in the company of the gentleman under whom I later read law, Mr. George Wythe, my teacher at the old Royal College of William and Mary, Dr. William Small, the four of us there referring to ourselves as a party quarret. I would have never thought that near 20 years later that I would be the occupant of that palace and preside over a commonwealth, not a colony, one of the 13 in our new nation, which I've ever referred to as the world's best hope. What could be more American than realizing where we've been, our history so very important, that we might have a better understanding of where we are, particularly to remember those remarkable principles which brought together 13 individual nations. Let that never be forgotten. Each one of those former colonies distant, disparate, one from the other, in the degree of religious opinion in one versus a vast difference in another, in the degree of freeholders in one versus the greater number of tenants upon the freeholdings in another. We were referred to as a radical rabble in the hinterlands of North America, but did we not show ourselves the most civilized people to the rest of the world, let alone the monarchy, the nobility, the aristocracy, the landed gentry of Great Britain, that we could bring together 13 individual nations, e pluribus unum, the first in the history of mankind, founded upon principle, not upon royalty or nobility or aristocracy, particularly founded upon the principles of meritocracy and the preservation, protection, defense of the human mind. The greatest vehicle of liberty and happiness any individual possesses, not a soul can take it away from you. And it is but common sense, is it not? It takes just as much energy to be happy as it does to be miserable. That which will certainly engage one's personal happiness is the open mind to carry their opinion upon religion as they choose. And it was in Williamsburg that this became the most apparent, because during the time I was serving in the old Virginia House of Burgesses, we realized growing numbers of dissenters coming into the colony of Virginia. I use the word dissenters because they were not of the Church of England. And lest we forget in our history, we were not only governed by the British monarchy, we were governed by their particular church. And therefore, though we were free to hold our opinion upon religion as we should choose, all of us had to pay our taxes to the support of the Church of England. Our tithing was required by everyone. All of us, if we desired to marry, had to purchase a marriage license from the Church of England. And all of us, regardless of our religious opinion, had to attend to the Church of England at least 12 Sundays a year, on the average 1 Sunday a month. Now, if any desisted, they were fined, and if any refused to pay their fine, they were thrown into jail. I remember, do you, before the war began, our jails here in Virginia were filled with Baptists. They had come down from the north preaching freedom for religion. I stood on their behalf, so did Colonel Henry at that time. And so it was in 1769, because of the Baptists and many others desiring that liberty to worship freely, the Virginia House of Burgesses welcomed a committee. They formed a committee entitled the Committee for Religion. I sat upon the committee. Colonel Henry sat upon the committee. George Wythe sat upon the committee to receive the growing number of petitions put forth by the growing number of dissenters. And so we allowed that an opportunity in discussion, in argument and debate, an Englishman's right for redress of grievances. And the war then intervened. And so it was after returning from Philadelphia, after the authoring of our Declaration of American Independence, which His Excellency General Washington referred to as our promise. I returned to Williamsburg that autumn of 1776 to commence revising the monarchical code under which we were born and grew up. And by 1779, when I was elected the second governor of the new Commonwealth, Mr. Wythe, Mr. Thomas Ludwell Lee, Mr. Edmund Pendleton, and myself drew up 126 revisals of that monarchical code. 126, one-third was devoted to the revising of the penal system. No longer could an individual judged guilty of stealing a chicken receive the capital punishment. Let us revise that system to create a system of penitence, penitentiary, that one could be rejuvenated, revitalized, to return to society of use and support. It was Bill 21 to dissolve primogeniture and entail. I benefited from primogeniture and entail. I was the eldest son in a family of 10 children. I had 3 younger brothers and I had 6 sisters, which is remarkable I survived, is it not? But we revised the code of primogeniture and entail, Bill 21. Bill 51 to end the importation of slaves to Virginia, allow a master to free all of his people. Bill 79 for a universal system of education, open unto the poor as well as the wealthy, unto the female as well as the male. And that which brings us here together, Bill 82 for religious freedom. Before I read excerpts of that bill here, and we continue in our gathering to hear from others here, more important in their present administrations of our Commonwealth and our purpose here today, I cannot help but reflect of the 4 bills I just pronounced: 21 to end primogeniture and entail, 51 to end the importation of slaves, 79 for a universal system of education, and 82 for religious freedom, introduced into the new Virginia House of Delegates then seated in Williamsburg. The first to be resolved of those 4 within a year was primogeniture and entail, an equal distribution of property within a family if the parent dies intestate. Leaving the 3 left, 51 to end the importation of slaves, 79 for education, 82 for religious freedom. Lest we forget, citizens, though argued and debated a good 3 years, my Bill 51 ended the importation of slaves to Virginia, and then opened the debate to allow a master finally to free all of his people. We were beholden earlier, you could only free 1 enslaved per year relevant to meritorious service shown unto the master. That was enacted in 1723. Anyone know how many were freed under that particular law as the Revolution commenced? I'm embarrassed to say 16. Argued and debated for another year in 1785. That bill allowed a master to free all of his people so long as he placed 25 Spanish milled dollars on the head of every slave he manumitted. So as you know, those of means were the ones who had that ready money to commence, if you will, that pathway was the ultimate abolition of this barbarous practice. 2 left, 79 and 82. The success of one over the other is what gathers us here today. On this day, in January the 16th, 1786, our government removed from Williamsburg then, and through the efforts of my good friend, my colleague, my successor in the highest office, James Madison, I was not here, our bill for religious freedom was finally approved, ratified, resolved, made law, the first of its kind in human history, protecting and defending the liberty of the human mind. Citizens, lamentably, I stand here to tell you that Bill 79, as I know it, is still argued and debated. It has succeeded only by small degrees There is not a universal system of education provided for the poor as well as the wealthy, the female as well as the male, and I pronounce that this concerns me, for how will our future be able to understand the purpose, the valor, and the accomplishment of the resolutions of those other bills, but particularly 82, in protecting the freedom of the human mind, particularly to be cultivated through a universal system of education. Never let us forget that I purposely named the bill on behalf of the committee. It's not a bill of religious freedom, and that is what Colonel Patrick Henry argued. He said Jefferson seeking to provide a disestablishment of religion, a separation of religion. Nay, citizens, it is named as the committee named their purpose, the bill for religious freedom. Because as I have written, and I'm not the first, wherever there is freedom for religion, you will see the greatest improvement of the condition of man. To wit, if you will, certain passages of our bill for religious freedom. Quote, whereas Almighty God has created the mind free, that all attempts to influence it by temporal punishments or burthens or by civil incapacitations tend only to beget habits of hypocrisy and meanness, and therefore are a departure from the plan of the holy author of our religion, that to compel a man to furnish contributions of money for the propagation of opinions which he disbelieves is sinful and tyrannical, that our civil rights have no dependence on our religious opinions, any more than our opinions in physics or geometry. And finally, that truth is great and will prevail if left to herself, that she is the proper and sufficient antagonist to error and has nothing to fear from the conflict unless by human interposition disarmed of her natural weapons, free argument and debate. Be it enacted by General Assembly that no man shall be compelled to frequent or support any religious worship, place, or ministry whatsoever, nor shall be enforced, restrained, molested, or burthened in his body or goods, nor shall otherwise suffer on account of his religious opinions or belief, but that all men shall be free to profess and by argument to maintain their opinions in matters of religion, and that the same shall in no wise diminish, enlarge, or affect their civil capacities. We are free to declare and do declare that the rights hereby asserted are of the natural rights of mankind, and that if any act shall be hereafter passed to repeal the present or to narrow its operation, such act will be an infringement of natural right. End quote. I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you all this morning. I congratulate you all in the continued importance and preservation of this great principle in the founding of our nation, and I welcome Mr. Martin.
Mr. President, we have before you today the fruits of those ideas. And I'd like for those who are representing the leadership of Richmond's faith communities, if you would stand, please. What a day. My name is Bill Martin. I'm the director for this building, the Religious Freedom Center, and for our old place on Clay Street. But they're all combined with one idea, that Richmond's history is essential to understanding American history. All of it. And so we have a number of people that have made this day possible. And so I'd like to thank all of you for being here. I'd like to thank the Board of Trustees for the Valentine, if there are members of the Board of Trustees here, both active and past Board of Trustees, will you stand, please? These are the folks that make these things happen. Just a little bit about how this place happened. So over 3 years ago, working with the Council for America's First Freedom, this building was developed to mark permanently this big American idea. And through this partnership with the Council and with Marriott, and I would like to, I'm going to embarrass you, Glade, it's okay, but without Glade and Justin Knight's support through Marriott and the work that they're doing in the city, this would not have happened, and so thank you for all of your support. As our president was saying, you know, when this corner, and then we were just talking earlier, the chair, the great chair of Virginia, would have been somewhere here, somewhere on this corner when these decisions were being made. It was a time of radical ideas. Think about it. Justice, liberty, freedom of speech and press, powerful ideas that we continue to try to make real today. And you know what? Richmond invented it. Richmond invented America. Where would there be a Bill of Rights? Would the Constitution be the form that it's in today? Would we have a Supreme Court that functions the way today's Supreme Court does without Richmonders? No. And so central to these radical ideas is this notion of a mind free. As it says in the preamble, God hath created mind free. And this is an amazing, amazing idea. It embodies all those aspirational values of our founding fathers. Not always executed well, but the aspirational values. This belief in the power of individuals, the power of ideas, the power of knowledge and wisdom. Liberty, that strange concept proclaimed by Patrick Henry, to worship or not worship, to believe or not believe. The free mind. And what this requires, this free mind, is informed people and civil discourse, the ability to learn, to experiment, to reflect, to act, to create. It's about building a life for your family in this area, in this city. It's about that odd thing called the pursuit of happiness. Pursuit of happiness. And I think where we stand today and sit today is really an interesting spot for us. Because a block away up the hill stands Jefferson's Capitol, inspired by the ideals of this new republic. But I will tell you that the challenge of being on this corner is one block this way, which was really the infrastructure for the center of the domestic slave trade. And they stand at this nexus on this corner, the challenge that still remains for us today. We also, within a block or two of here, we can find those Baptists. I hope there are not a lot of Baptists. Baptists and Friends and one of the earliest Jewish congregations in the country just around the corner. The free mind, informed in conversation. Now, we've got lots of monuments in Richmond. We do, Mayor. But I will tell you that this is the most important one because this monument is the monument that challenges us all to open our minds and celebrate that freedom of conscience, which is important to everything else that follows. Where will the mind set free go? And that's the question for this corner. Where will the mind, if set free, go? And so it's an interesting challenge for us, and we have wonderful partners today, and we're going to continue to ask these questions. I think that's the key question for Richmond. But we have a wonderful partner this morning with Monticello, that house up on the hill. And so it's my honor to introduce Gary Standling, who is the Vice President of Visitor Programs for Thomas Jefferson's Monticello. Gary?
Thanks, Bill, very much. And thanks to all of you for being here this morning, to Mayor Stoney and to Mrs. Northam, and for all of you, for some of our donors have joined us this morning, and they got on the bus early to come from Charlottesville, many of them. One of our trustees, Pam Reynolds, is here as well. And I am really grateful to be here and for us to sponsor with the Valentine this day, share with them this opportunity. And so on behalf of Leslie Green Bowman, the president of the Thomas Jefferson Foundation, it is my honor to greet you and be with you here today. We're in, of course, as Bill noted, a really auspicious place to mark this occasion when the legislature of the still new Commonwealth of Virginia chose a course with profound implications not only for our state but for our nation, and set an example to the world in a full-throated defense of the freedom of conscience. And the exhibition here, and of course many scholars across time and disciplines, have analyzed the significance of the statute. So you'll be relieved to know I'm not going to do that this morning. I will point out that there's an op-ed in the Richmond Times-Dispatch today written by my colleague, John Ragosta, historian at Monticello, where he really does give, I think, a prescient take on the enduring legacies of the statute. So I encourage you to read it. But I want to note that what looks like something that was foreordained and inevitable never is, right? Every historian knows this, anyone who ever studies the past. History, like our own lives, is full of contingencies. And the passing of the statute was a close-run thing. It almost did not happen. And it's important for us to remember that. It was contested. Petitioners sent in petitions to the legislature, 12,000 signatures on 90 petitions advocating for Jefferson's bill. The bill was almost defeated by an alternative that was proposed by Patrick Henry. And that reminds us that the founders shared a vision of independence, but disagreed on just about everything else. And the choices they made, both for our better and perhaps for ill, have led us to where we are. It is important that we know them. James Madison got that bill through the legislature, as Mr. Jay noted. He was its quarterback. He was the tactician who saw it through. And he and Jefferson saw the protection of conscience in matters of religion as critical to the success of a republic, a self-governing nation. And both of them were pleased to see its passage. Toleration alone was not sufficient. To tolerate someone else's beliefs is to imply you can take that toleration back, that it's revocable, that it's contingent. This must be, as Mr. Jay said, about for religious freedom. For Virginians, and then in the First Amendment, of course, all American citizens, both Jefferson and Madison believed that government should not have the power to compel your belief by any means whatsoever. And equally important, and perhaps less talked about, as is clear in the statute, your fellow citizens have no authority to compel your belief either. So whatever it may be, and however much at variance it might be with someone else's, you have your reason alone to defend it and the right to do so. And at Monticello, we want to bring that history of Jefferson's ideas forward and the stories of Monticello to the forefront of the dialogues we have today about our values, our beliefs, our actions, about who we are as Americans. Citizens and those who were long denied citizenship over generations have, of course, taken up those ideas and made them their own. to be who we are today is not simply the result of the ideas of the founders. It's the actions of the generations who have followed, who have said, so am I, so do I have that right. And the right to defend your belief is the most fundamental, I would argue, of them all. And Jefferson, you can see these ideas embedded in the statute. Even if sometimes the headlines today about religious freedom tend to turn on very close constitutional issues, today I would ask you to read the statute with a broader purview, to read it to see the belief that reason, and by reason alone, can a man or a woman keep their own conscience. Take time today to read and contemplate those words and linger over those places that Mr. Jefferson mentioned in the statute. It's interesting, too, I'll make a plug. Read the draft that Jefferson wrote versus the bill that was passed. You'll see where some of those changes show maybe where his thinking was even more radical than those of the legislature then assembled. As is true of a lot of bills, right? Read the draft first, and then read what becomes statute. A week after the statute was passed, Madison wrote to Jefferson, noting that he had sat through 90 days of a 97-day session and kind of outlined the bills. And he came to the one about religious freedom, and he said, after sort of describing the process and noting that the changes somewhat defaced the composition, he said, I flatter myself, Madison said this, I have in this country extinguished forever the ambitious hope of making laws for the human mind. And Jefferson, it took him a while to write back. You'll remember your wrists, right, sir? You had a little incident. You can ask. If you don't know what happened to him, you can ask him. It had to do with maybe work. You can ask him. Has to do with a lady. But Jefferson, when he wrote back, he wrote in his reply, it is comfortable to see the standard of reason at length erected after so many ages in which the human mind has been held in vassalage. This is classic Jefferson language. And he then goes on to say, it is honorable for us to have produced the first legislature who has had the courage to declare that the reason of man may be entrusted with the formation of his own opinions. Jefferson believed that reason was the surest path to human progress, and the statute marked an important moment in that progression for him, important enough that it was one of the three elements he places as his epitaph when he dies. And he intended that freedom of conscience to extend to all religious views, far beyond those of the Protestant Christian denominations that made up Virginia at the time. And in doing so, he and Madison set a precedent that would expand far beyond our Commonwealth. But let us note that 2 centuries after the statute's passage, only 6 out of 10 countries around the world enjoy that same kind of religious freedom. Let us be grateful that we're among the first to make it so. So I'm honored to be here with you this day, and thank you for marking this anniversary with us. Thank you very much.
We are filming bits of this today, and if you would like to interview, if you're one of our religious leaders that are in the room today, we want to document this day and are creating a new video that actually will be shown in the hotel rooms here, so that you will actually know, have some of the ideas of the impact on the community. So cameras will be set up after this event to make sure that happens. It is really a distinct honor for me to introduce the mayor of the city of Richmond, LeVar Stoning. You know, I think that no one really, understands the power of ideas more than our mayor. He understands that these ideas are roaming around the streets in every corner of the city, and that in those we can have new confidence about who we are as a place, who we can be as a city, and values that we must confirm. A mayor that's open to the possibilities and to the ideas that can change us and change the world. And it's my honor to introduce the mayor of the city of Richmond, LeVar Stoning.
Well, good morning, everyone. Before I begin, I want to say first to my good friend Bill Martin, thank you and the Valentine Center for putting this program together, and I think we are all beneficiaries of your work here in the city, and that you all are a staple here in the city of Richmond, and thank you for being partners today. I want to welcome everyone to the great city of Richmond and to the birthplace of the religious liberty in our country. That's right. As Bill said earlier today, on this very spot here in Shockoe Slip, where the Valentine First Freedom Center sits, Virginia's General Assembly met in secret during the American Revolution. And in 1786, this is where the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom was signed by the Virginia General Assembly. So, I think it's appropriate that after all these years, we are here today with members, at least I saw one member, of the 400th General Assembly, no less, on the anniversary of the passage of this statute to celebrate this important tenet of our democracy. That tenet, that we should be free to choose our religious beliefs, to have freedom of thought, and that no individual can be compelled to worship or support the church with taxes. The Statute of Religious Freedom was a precursor to the rights and freedoms enshrined in the First Amendment and the foundation of the principle of the separation of church and state. Of course, this statute was drafted by Mr. J. Thomas Jefferson, who designed the Capitol just up the hill where some lawmakers sit today and convene to do the work of the people. But the values embedded in the statute are just as important today as they were back then. As public servants, we must be guardians of these freedoms and the people who choose to exercise them. And we need to protect government from being used as an agent of religious belief. I think that is more important now more than ever. Richmond is the appropriate place to have this important discussion, as it has played a pivotal role in the history of our nation, some of it being its brightest moments, and unfortunately some being its darkest moments as well. Freedom of worship, freedom from discrimination, freedom from tyranny, and freedom from bondage all have its roots right here in the city of Richmond. In our city's history, enslaved Africans, living and breathing human beings, no different than you and me, were brought and sold in Shockoe Bottom, just steps away from where we stand here today. After this statute of religious freedom was enacted, not before. That's why places like the Virginia Freedom Center and our ongoing efforts to promote healing, education, atonement in our city are so important, not to the understanding of our past, but in informing and educating our future citizens as well. It's also important to the leaders who represent them too. Fortunately, in Virginia, I have the confidence that we have men and women of good conscience and also of good faith, many of them who are with us here today, working towards that single goal to ensure that we protect those freedoms. One of those leaders sits here on the front row as my friend, the First Lady of Virginia, Pam Northam. And not only is Pam just the First Lady, but she's also a champion, Virginia's champion, a champion for our children, a champion for our natural resources and her work with the Chesapeake Bay, but also she serves alongside, I think, Governor Northam and another great champions as well, someone who's always going to step up and step out for the people, not just for the city of Richmond, but the people for the Commonwealth of Virginia. I bring to you today our First Lady, Pam Northam.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor Stoney, Mr. President, and our friends at the Valentine and Monticello. Thank you for inviting me to be here with you today to commemorate the anniversary of the 1786 passage of Virginia's Statute of Religious Freedom. Some of you may remember that not long ago I spoke at the JCC as we grieved collectively for those killed at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. There was a huge crowd of people of all walks of life and all religions to comfort one another and to condemn the violation of a sacred place of worship and a community as we wrestled with our grief to speak about tolerance. I pointed out that we were meeting that day just down the road from Mr. Jefferson's own university. Mr. Jefferson, the author of Virginia's Statute for Religious Freedom, about the freedom of conscience and separation of church and state, the precursor to our amendment protections, the freedom and protection that my ancestor and so many of yours came to this country to seek. I was surprised while visiting the Great Library of Virginia the next day to see hanging on their walls the iconic images by Rockwell. They were inspired by Roosevelt's For Freedom speech during World War II to remind the nation what we were fighting for: freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom of speech, and freedom for religion. When I remarked on it, the librarian asked if I would like to see it. And I said, "Oh, you have a copy?" She said, "No. We have the original." I have to tell you what a moving experience it was to see that fragile old document and to consider how truly revolutionary it was, how it started right here in Virginia, and how it became a guiding principle for our great nation and Commonwealth. This especially resonated with me again when just a few weeks later, many of the same clergy I had just been speaking with would be standing bravely together, shoulder to shoulder, when men shouting racist and anti-Semitic slogans while brandishing torches marched down the lawn of UVA and into the streets the next day, leaving a wake of death and injury. The governor and I are very fortunate to get to visit many different faith groups and congregations all throughout Virginia. We have learned that there are many paths, and we have so much more in common than what divides us. Here in Virginia, we welcome people of every faith, every nationality, every race, and every orientation, and hate has no place here. On this day celebrating religious freedom, can we have adventurous civil conversations with generous listening? I would say that this is the Virginia way. Freedom of religion is freedom of belief, freedom of choice. And we can choose to continue to uphold these essential American values today. Let us turn our concern into advocacy. Speak out, be informed, get involved. Let's stand together against bigotry and intolerance to preserve the great country we all know and love. Soon we will celebrate the anniversary of the birth date of Reverend Martin Luther King, who often spoke of faith and love. He said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." Thank you very much.
We're so grateful that you chose to take a few moments out of your day to join us here and mark this important moment in Richmond's history, in Virginia's history, and the world's history. We're going to move now. I think Mr. Jefferson is going to meet us out by the monument so that there's this thing called a selfie that may happen on a corner in Richmond, Virginia. But we're grateful and thank you for coming today. We'll see you next year.